Welcome, everyone, to Latter Daily Digest. We honor creators. And today we have Lindsay Helm, who wrote a book called VIXEN. I think we can show the book really quickly.
Yay!
Yeah, like
Hello.
double view here.
Awesome. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just gonna say I really love the cover and the art on it. I just think it's super pretty. And I think you just write so beautifully. I think something that a lot of women in the church can really relate to, and it is basically the loss of self that happens over time in the church, and this kind of battle on the inside of who we really are versus who we're trying to be, because we're trying to be good people. And so I think I know I've talked about this before when I've told my story. One thing that's different is that you're a convert to the church, and so there is I mean, we all have little things in our childhood, even when we're born into it, that are little bits of our personality that are able to come out. But I feel like when you're a convert to the church, you have a little bit more of that base established to start to go back to. You want to speak on that and speak on maybe, well, first, like how it was that you came to the church, because you had kind of a unique family situation around that. Is that right?
Yeah. So I grew up as an only child. My mom's a single mom, and we lived with my maternal grandparents. I had a lot of health issues and things like that. So we just needed the extra support. And from an early age, I always knew that I just had this deep intrinsic feeling that I had meaning in the world and that my life had purpose. And I was very connected to myself, but also into this belief that there was a higher power. And I didn't really have a lot of religious upbringing. I would go to church from time to time with a friend, but nothing too major that was in my daily life. And so I grew up with this belief that my life had purpose. I was connected to something bigger, something spiritual. And so when I went into middle school, that's a time of transition for everybody. And I was really in this phase of seeking something more and trying to make meaningful friendships that were long lasting, trying to kind of find my place, just like most kids are at that age. And I happened to make friends with the LDS kids at school, and they were so awesome. And they still really are some of the best people. But they took me in and they invited me to mutual. And so I started going to mutual with them. I started hanging out with them at their houses. I started to interact with their families and their siblings. Their families were much different than mine. They lived in a very traditional nuclear family, mom and dad. Dad goes to work, mom stays home with the kids. There's lots of kids everywhere all the time, lots of chaos. And I was raised in a totally different environment where my home was very quiet and I was the only child, and I had a single mom. And so I didn't know what that was like to have a dad that went to work and then would come home at night, and, just that kind of lifestyle. I didn't have any of that.
And you lived with your grandmother too, right? So it was just like 3 generations of just females only, all at like a separate.
My grandfather was there too, but he did work a lot. So he ended up, like, he would come and go. There would be times where he'd be gone for a while. There were times where he'd not have to work so much. So yeah, I mean, it very much was a 3-generation, like, feminine energy type of household.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we lived there my entire childhood. And
Lindsay,
when
you went to the Mormons' homes and you saw sort of like all the people and the chaos that was going on, you probably saw that there was love in that chaos still.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I guess when I say chaos, I say it as good chaos. I actually loved it, and I was a little bit jealous of it because I was like, wow, this is amazing. I loved going in, and maybe it sounds weird to people listening, but I loved like the screaming kids and the fighting siblings and just like, you know, the giant bags of cereal. I remember like everybody's house had those like huge bags of cereal. And I'm like, wow, who would ever need a bag of cereal that
A big
large?
Mormon family.
And so
I would think that too. Like I had siblings, so I wasn't an only child, but I remember families that I went to that seemed, that were more Mormon
yeah,
and better Mormons that had like 10 kids. That same thing. There's a lot more chaos. They teased each other, but I felt like they loved each other more than like my siblings did. So I just kind of thought like big families is what makes people this way. And I've since learned some things of, I guess that there's a dark side to that kind of a
yeah,
lifestyle as well. But I was attracted for the same reason. It seemed like, my friends that had a lot of little brothers and sisters, some of them really seemed to really like them. And it was very endearing and very cute, and just that kind of stuff. So yeah. So it's fun. Even when you're born into Mormonism, you can still feel and like have the same kind of feeling of a lack of something or
mhm,
looking forward to something. And I think I like that you brought up the middle school age. I think I know I had a sense and I was thinking that it primarily came from Mormon teachings, but now I'm wondering if it might be just more universal among that age range. This sense, because we're transitioning from childhood into adulthood. I felt really strongly that like the decisions I'm making now in middle school, especially about friendships, would kind of put me on either a good path for the future or maybe a
right,
bad one for the future. So it kind of seemed like I was making some really important decisions at this point in my life that would, like really affect things going on. And in a sense, that's true. You can get off track at that age and it can be very difficult to come back. But anyway, I thought that was from the church really hammering in like the covenant path, not that we were calling it back then, but the importance of good friends with good values and blah, blah, blah. But from what you were saying, it sounds like, and a lot of that is tied to purpose. Of course, for me, that was very much tied to being a member of God's true church. But it's
mhm,
interesting to me that you still had that kind of
yeah,
feeling, and it felt right to be with the Mormons. Like you felt like
yeah,
this is a good, safe path. And your parents agreed, or at least they weren't concerned about you being Mormon
yeah.
at the time, right?
Man, my I think my mom was just so grateful that I found a good group of kids to hang out with. I also will say that I had a very hard time fitting in. I didn't really know where I fit. I was a tomboy, but I also was very goofy and awkward, and I was very insecure, and so I I tried a couple different, in middle school it's all about people have their groups of friends that they hang out with, and I really tried to fit in with a couple different groups, and nothing really felt like it was going to stick. And and I even knew back then that if you're trying super hard and or you feel like you're on your toes and you don't really feel like you would fit in if you stop trying that hard, then maybe it's just not the place for you. And so there was a couple of groups that I would try to hang out with, and I really wanted them to like me, and it just felt like I was trying way too hard to fit in, and I wasn't actually being real because I was trying to fit in with them. But then when I met the LDS kids, they were kind of goofy and they were kind of awkward too, and I just felt like we just meshed really well. And so I started going to mutual with them, and their activities were really fun. And honestly, at that point, I actually really enjoyed being able to learn more like feminine stuff. So it wouldn't be until I got a little bit older that I kind of would um, I'd challenge that a little bit. But at first, I was kind of like, oh, actually, learning how to sew a button would be really useful. And like doing that kind of thing. And so it made logical sense to me that we would be learning how to do that stuff. But anyway, I ended up joining the church when I was 13 after I actually don't even know how long I had been going to mutual. I started going to Sunday services, and then I ended up getting baptized when I was 13. And then I continued to stay in the church. I went to high school. I attended seminary every day.
Oh,
And then
so I had a question as
Yeah,
yeah,
and
well.
I was muted. Go ahead, Gene.
And what it was is like, so the missionaries came over. Did you have one set or two sets, or was it the
You
elders or the
golden.
sisters.
That's right. I always skip over this part when I tell people this. I don't know why. It just doesn't seem like an important part of the story, but it actually is. So I knew I was going to join the church before I even met the missionaries. I didn't really even know who I mean, I knew who the missionaries were, but they weren't like a pivotal part of my conversion. And so
Formality, more or
right.
less.
It was more of like, hey, we just want to make sure that you kind of understand our doctrine and everything. And so they did give me the lessons. But again, it was more of a formality. I was kind of like, when can we just get on with it already?
Yeah.
And I only had one set of missionaries that came over and did all of that. And, you know,
And did you understand the doctrine?
Looking back on it, I'm like, I don't think that was even important to me, because in my mind, I got to join this community. And that's what I was really looking for, was a sense of community. I was looking for a place to belong. And so, to be honest with you, the doctrine didn't really bother me. Like, it didn't make me uncomfortable.
You didn't want to read the fine print. You just wanted to sign up.
Right. And again, I'm 13. So
right. That also sounds like there's nothing like particularly, what's the word I'm looking for? Nothing like really troubling, which of course anything really troubling missionaries wouldn't talk about. But some people do have things where they learn something and they're like, that's not resonating with me, or I disagree with that. So you weren't really having any of that.
No.
And I think when we talked before, you did talk about, there were a few aspects of the church that did kind of ring true to you. So maybe not so much like a testimony of the Book of Mormon, but you did feel like you felt the Spirit. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I like I said, I always felt like my life had purpose somehow. And something that really attracted me to the church was that they preach that each of us has a purpose here on earth, and that each of us was sent here for a reason, a very specific reason. And so that was like hook, line, and sinker for me, because I already believed that. I already knew that. I felt that in my bones, and no one, like the church hadn't even told me that. It was just something that I felt in myself. And so, having the missionaries come to my door after I kind of already knew somewhat about the church, and then them kind of reinforcing this idea, and then them giving me the scriptures and stuff like that, I looked at it more of, I want to get baptized. And then, because I already have a testimony of some of this other stuff, like the community, the family, you're sent here for a reason, that you have a purpose, that God knows who you are. I had a testimony of that. But after my goal essentially was, after I got baptized, I wanted to be able to have a testimony of their doctrine as well. And I felt like, well, if they have all of these good things that they're telling me already, that I'm learning in sacrament meeting or in young women's, because I had been going a couple of times, that if all of that stuff that they're teaching me in that setting translates into their doctrine, like, it has to be wonderful, and it has to be true, right? It's all part of the package to me. That's how I felt. And then again, knowing that I'm 13 and like biblical language doesn't really make sense either. So you're kind of just like, I'll understand it when I understand it, you know?
Yeah. I was going to say this, going back to this, I think the purpose feeling, and then also just the vulnerability we have at that age where we're going through this transition from childhood to adulthood. I do think that the church, one of the things the church does so well in a controlling, manipulative way, if we're going to use the C word and say cult, I think one of the strongest things that it does to us at this age is patriarchal blessings, which is basically, it's a one-time deal, once in a lifetime, super special prayer where somebody whose job it is to kind of get revelation from God about you, kind of, it's sometimes people describe it as like a horoscope. As a believing Mormon, I would find that very problematic wording, but for all intents and purposes, that is basically what it is. And they really hammer it to you that like, this is a special blessing. It's from God. That there are things being revealed about you, like who you were before in our premortal existence, but when we believe we were spirits before we came here, and part of what that mission is for us here, and also in our future. So do you have anything to say about that, about getting your patriarchal blessing, did it have a really strong, like a kind of cementing you in effect at all? Or is that not a part of your story?
And it's like personal
Absolutely.
scripture.
Personal
Yep.
scripture.
My patriarchal blessing was absolutely pivotal. And I think that is the reason it really solidified my belief in the church, and also that I wanted to continue into adulthood living on this path, like to become a wife and a mother and to be sealed in the temple and to like work towards eternal life, essentially. Like that is what that piece of paper, that blessing, it solidified that for me.
And you're not supposed to share it with other people.
No.
And so this is something, when coming out of it, boys, when they got theirs, a lot would have language alluding to future like high leadership positions, which a lot interpreted to mean that someday they would be like really high apostles and maybe even prophets someday. And then, yeah, for women, it just so happened that I think most of our blessings, the majority of our blessings, would say that we would get married and have children. Was that was part of yours too? I'm guessing.
So, yes. So there's two different parts to it, which maybe later when we get into talking about VIXEN, I'll refer back to. I think that's really important. So the first one is that, and maybe everyone says this, I don't know, but at the time, this was extremely special to me. In my patriarchal blessing, it says that I'm one of the chosen daughters of God. And it was saying that I'm like one of the select few that was special and that God handpicked for this time, and that he knew me, and that if I continued on the path of righteousness, and that if I lived a righteous life, that I would find a man who was worthy of me, and that we would be together forever with our children. And so that to me, it just was like, I was solidified in my testimony just by doing that. And it made me want to do everything right, like almost obsessively. It made me want to do everything right, because here I was just told as a 15, 16-year-old girl that not only am I like on this path to eternal life, but also that
you're
God
a key player.
handpicked me.
Yeah.
And this feeling that I've had inside of me that I had a purpose, even from the time before I joined the church, was now being reinforced by God, like literally by God.
That's right. You already knew you were special, and here was evidence of it.
Right.
And I think too, like for our age in young women, we were also reciting like a little kind of a chant every week in Young Women's, and it starts out like, "We are daughters of a heavenly Father who loves us, and we love Him." So that I think that kind of personal relationship, I really felt strongly and was thinking along the same lines that we're not just like daughters of God, and that like all women are daughters of God, because we all are, but we are like. We're key players. We have primary roles to play. We're like leaders in this kind of second coming restoration kind of a thing, where we're not with the masses. So yeah, and that's really, really alluring to, I think, that age range. So
And yes, especially being a young woman that was really insecure and that was a little goofy and awkward and didn't feel like she fit in. And then all of a sudden she's being told that God knows you and you have a purpose and you actually are meant for something. And it gave me this like sense of confidence and self-worth that I didn't necessarily always have when I would be out amongst my peers. Like they maybe wouldn't validate me or something the way that I needed to be as a teenager. And then yet this document was like, well, the highest power in the whole universe knows who you are and has a plan for you. So
you double down, because so first you get baptized, more of a sense of community, but now you're starting to get locked in and become obsessive. You said it was a patriarchal blessing that really kind of started on that path of like doing everything right.
Yeah. And then around that same time is when I was, entering high school and having seminary. And so not only was I going to Mutual on Wednesdays and doing sacrament on Sundays and, the whole church 3-hour thing on Sundays, but now I was getting spiritual instruction every single day of the week. And we were actually diving deep into the scriptures, and they were making it a little bit, they were accommodating like our learning levels and stuff. So they were able to simplify it for us so that we were actually able to understand what the scriptures were saying. And we were doing fun activities that would reinforce these ideas even more. And so,
and did we say where you were at? It was seminary part, like were you enough of a Mormon population that you could take it during the day, or you didn't have to do early morning? Tell our audience where it was that this was happening. Where
yeah, so I'm from Eastern Washington, specifically the Tri-Cities. So we had a very large LDS population, and actually I was telling Gene before we got on that I heard someone call it like the mini Provo or the Washington Provo or something. We have, I guess, a really high I knew we had a high population of LDS people there, but it's like high enough to have it be referred to as that. And we have a temple there. That's where I ended up getting sealed to my husband a few years later. So I didn't have I had 0 hour is what we called it, but that was for like a different class because we had seminary during the day. So.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. All right. Continue.
Okay. So I had my patriarchal blessing. I started going to seminary, and then I ended up having to make a choice about where I'm going to go to college. And I decided I was going to go to BYU, Idaho. Pretty much all my friends were either going to BYU or BYU, Idaho. So I decided to apply to BYU, Idaho. I got in and I moved down there, graduated, moved down there, and ended up living in an apartment full of girls I'd never met before, which was so fun and amazing. And I'm so glad that I got to have that experience. It was about, I think it was.
Can I ask why you went to school at all? Were you going for career or education, or were you hoping to meet RMs or combo of it?
Yeah, so both. Well, and I will tell you that having a single mom was extremely important to this whole thing because she didn't go to college before she had me. She went to college. She went back to school after she had me. So I watched her struggle to get her education. And so she drilled it into me like, you have no other choice. You have to go to school. You have to be able to support yourself. Like, do not ever expect a man to take care of you. She really nailed that one home. And so I did that. And I didn't, in my mind, I didn't have another choice. I had to go to college. But then at the same time,
church, I think went along with that, because if I recall correct, I think we're about the same age. And like for Gordon B. Hinckley, because Gordon B. Hinckley was the prophet for you, right?
Yep.
Yeah. He was someone who said that women should get educated. And that seemed to be something that he kind of pushed for. And it was taught to me as strongly, but it was taught that it's good for a woman to have an education because, well, first of all, an educated woman would be a better wife and mother. That was my understanding and what I took in. But then also this, just in case kind of a thing.
Backup plan.
Yeah. However, most of the time you are kind of expected to, depending on where your husband is in the position of everything, if he's graduating before you, or, anytime he can graduate, but if you start to get married and start to have kids, it's usually you're giving up that education. So even if something happens down the road, a lot of times you're still kind of screwed. But yeah, so this wouldn't have been, I think your mother's experience and what the sayings were around women getting educated would seem to completely line up, I think, for you, right? Yeah, no conflict there. Yeah,
and also, that was going to be a good place for me to find a husband too, to get that MRS degree.
Yeah.
And I was definitely like open about that because that was also something that was being taught to me was that you got to find a husband, you got to find that eternal companion. And so I went to school and I did want to be educated. I did. But there was always kind of an asterisk above that because it was like, I want to be educated so that I can take care of myself if I have to. Not because I necessarily want to.
Right.
It was like, well, that's still my husband's job to take care of me, but I want to have a backup plan just in case. And that sounds gross to me now, but at the time it made a lot of sense. And I ended up getting my degree. I graduated with my bachelor's degree. But before I graduated, I had met my husband my sophomore year of college. So we got married. We actually had a bishop tell us that we had a very long engagement, but we were engaged for 6 months. We knew each other for a total of 10 months. So
for Mormon standards, yeah. A long time.
Yeah. So we got married. I was 19. He was 23. We finished up our college together. And when I graduated, I walked across the stage to accept my diploma, 6 months pregnant with our son. We are a one and done family. So he's 10 now. But yeah, I was pregnant with him when I graduated from college. And then when he was born, I had a very spiritual experience that I denied for a long time. And that was that the first time I held him in my arms, the thought in my head, of course, the first thought was like, oh my gosh, this is my child. I love this child. And I said hello to him and I said, I'm your mommy. But then the second thought in my brain was, he will never serve a mission. And I laid there with him on my chest and I thought about that for a second and I was like, whoa, like, I have no idea where that came from, because that's not anything that I thought while I was pregnant with him, before that, anything. And then I pushed it out of my mind. I forced it to go away. And it wasn't until he was about a year old when my husband told me that he didn't want to be involved in the church anymore, that memory came back to me. And that started the entire deconstruction process from there. So
you already had sort of negative feelings toward like the patriarchy and other things. So your shelf was sort of filling up, but not necessarily because of doctrine or history or anything like that you've heard. Just sort of you grew up sort of in a feminine household, we could say feminist, and you were attracted to the other side of femininity, right? Mm-hmm. The doing things, the having skills, but being relegated probably was eating away at you.
Yeah. And, something that I had mentioned before was being in Rexburg, Idaho was very detrimental to my testimony that I had such a strong testimony when I got there, and maybe even for like the first year that I was there. But there were just little things about being in Rexburg and just the way that they were doing things and the expectations that they had, where I was like, this feels like this is not right and something is wrong. Like, I remember the ecclesiastical endorsements that we would have to do, and being called in there and sitting in there with my bishop and then having him ask me, sexually inappropriate questions and about who I'm dating and just kind of drilling me. And even when my husband and I got married, actually, we had to be interviewed by our bishop, and then we had to be interviewed by our stake president. And when we went in for one of those meetings, the stake president or the bishop, he asked me to talk without Travis there. And so I said, okay. And so we were talking for a minute and his whole demeanor changed. He asked me things like, how have you not had sex with your fiance, even though you've been engaged for 6 months? How have you kept yourselves pure? How have you kept, yourselves righteous? And so we talked for a little bit, and then I was feeling very nervous, but I was also feeling a little bit brave. And I asked a very hard question that was very hard for me to just say out loud, because that was something I was struggling with. But my husband, who is also a convert to the church, had other romantic experiences. And so he was not coming into this communion as a virgin. And as an adult man, like, that's perfectly normal in today's society. But in the Mormon world, that is not normal. And so I
would say any society, honestly, even in general, like, and this is just me coming from the anthropological perspective. Yeah, that is the norm for
I
us.
was going to say that human beings are sexual creatures.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I was so scared. I was
Right.
so scared. And okay, so this is a person who is a person of authority in my world, a person who is supposed to be, mouthpiece for God, called of God, blah, blah, blah. And I asked him, I said, I'm really struggling with this because I have kept myself pure. I have kept myself righteous. I have kept us righteous. Like my goal is to be married in the temple, to be sealed forever. Like that is my goal. So I have done nothing to, take us away from that. And he looked at me dead in the eyes and he said, you should never bring this up again. You should never talk to anybody about it, not even Travis, your husband. And you should just be grateful to have a man like him.
Well, okay, hold on. Okay, hold on. Okay. So when he said like never bring it up again, he was like, don't bring it up to Travis, the fact that he's not this pure virgin, right? Okay. So my thoughts are on this, that first coming into it, it's all on you because it's up to women. We're the temptresses, we're the seductresses, we're the ones that tempt poor men to fail in their purity, and we're supposed to be the purity gatekeepers. So it sounds like to me, like starting into this, he's grilling you because he wants to know if you've been doing it correctly and if you've been messing up. Basically, it looked like he's looking for something to have over you or to discipline you over, or to be like, make sure you're doing this right, but when it gets flipped and it turns out it's the guy, the man that's not pure, then it's just like, you know what, it doesn't even matter, like he's repented or he's whatever, and I hate that so much. I really, and for him to go like in the same interview, just like flip like that. And so I want to say, like, I mean, obviously, I agree that your husband is a worthy person, like regardless of it. But it's just, to me, that is so stark, the difference between what he was going after for you, but you were the good one, and then just how immediately that flipped to complete double standard for your. So I've only ever had one serious relationship, and that I was also 19 in college, and my boyfriend was also a convert and he was not a virgin. And so that was also a time for me to kind of, first of all, like give up on that idea, that because it is drilled to you so much in young women. It's like, and once you mess up, they talk about the atonement, but there is this feeling that once you mess up, like you've messed up forever, you can repent or whatever, but you will always be this like, I don't know what's the like broken woman or reformed like slut, kind
Too
of
dumb.
basically.
Yeah, you're too dumb. You're a licked cupcake.
Right. But I mean, even when you're back on the path, it's still you're the, the whore that's gotten back on the path. So there's still like, you're not just a good woman, like a good woman who stayed on the path. You have it. It's still a good story. It's still seen as like a righteous one, and used to get other women, wayward women to try to get back on the path, because you've got this here. But man, what a difference. But see, I'm thinking like with my boyfriend too, this was where I started to realize, or I started to feel like, like I loved him, and ultimately I started to see that it didn't really matter, honestly, that much, that if we were going to get married, like, so what? We would be intimate, that would be the rest of our lives, and his past experiences would just have nothing to do with it. And so so I think when you do start realizing that, or when you realize you love somebody like this much, that it doesn't make a difference to who they are, then like I don't know, it kind of flipped it on me, because I know that I felt if I messed up that I would feel guilty about it forever, no matter how much repenting I did. I would feel like, and there are some guys in the church that I knew would never be interested in me, period. Again, regardless of how righteous I was, if there was some kind of a mess up in the past. So anyway, sorry, I went on a rant for that. That makes me angry. We didn't talk about that. So that was like a news story.
So even when I was like talking about it, I had this like fluttering in my chest that was just like a fire. It was like embers that had been like stoked out for a while, and then all of a sudden they were like, "Oh yeah, Lindsay, remember that?" And then I was like, it just like, it makes me so angry, because that was a big shelf item for me. And that was right before we were going to go in the temple and learn about everything that goes on in the temple. And so,
did you tell him, by the way, at that time, or did you follow the bishop and like never bring it up?
So I actually I did not tell Travis because I was following his counsel, the bishop's counsel.
And I wouldn't want him to feel bad, and I assume you felt the same way too. Like it almost, you
and
wouldn't want
because
to
I
feel
had
like you're
talked to
shaming him.
Travis, I had talked to Travis beforehand about it because it had been really bothering me. And honestly, my opinion was like, if there's something that's really bothering you, especially if it pertains to your relationship, you should be able to talk to your person about it, you know? And so I had talked to him a lot about it, and I was really struggling, and he knew that I was really struggling with that. And so after this conversation with this bishop, my mouth was zipped. I did not say anything about it anymore. And it actually wasn't until I left the church and went to therapy that I said it out loud for the first time. And I told my therapist what this bishop had said. And I like let it out with just like this, like, I just feel like these boulders just were like off my shoulders. And she was like, are you kidding me? Like, what? You're not supposed to talk to your person about it. You're not supposed to talk through this with your partner who you're going to spend the rest of your life with, who you're going to be intimate with. Like, you're supposed to talk about that.
Another thing, Mormons are supposed to turn off like a light switch, right? On command.
Yeah. That's interesting because you're seeing it as like the bishop telling you really overstepping as far as relationships and openness in relationships goes. Whereas what I saw immediately was the immediate hypocrisy between where he was going with you. So you did see it then, and you did talk about it then, or was that something?
So I did see the hypocrisy in it. It really confused me though, because I was very much still in the church, and I feel like I was experiencing hypocrisy pertaining to my gender all the time, you know? And so for me, it was just kind of another one of those things where I'm like, that doesn't make sense. I guess I'll just put it on the shelf for now. And like, I don't like it, and I'm uncomfortable with it, and it doesn't feel good, and I'm a little angry about it. But yeah, it's just like kind of there. And so
you got a wedding to plan, so it's kind of like bigger fish.
Yes, I had a wedding to plan. I had to graduate. I had to, I was going to school, doing all of those things. So
let's talk about the temple real quick, because I think that's where we're going next, and we can go into, I don't know if we need to go into like a lot of detail, but or just what kind of relates to what we're talking about now. But I do, after you do talk about it, because we're going to talk about your new name, I did want to read like a couple passages from your chapter about your new name and the kind of the loss of identity. So anyway, but do you want to, let's go to the temple experience, because we get an endowment first. So there's when you get married in the temple, there's kind of two ceremonies. And one is called the endowment. And if you serve a mission, you will do that endowment ceremony before going on a mission. And then the wedding it's called a sealing, not a wedding. But that's what it is. That's the eternal marriage contract. That will happen at that time. But if you do not serve a mission, and this is the case for most women, this endowment and then the wedding ceremony happened pretty close together. From what I understand, a lot of times it would be the same day. You would go immediately from one to the other, but you had a little bit of a buffer, I think, if I recall correctly. But
a couple days.
But still they happened to basically together in a package. You have to have the one to do the other. So let's talk about that.
So I went through the temple for the first time, and, I wish I could remember. I remember bits and pieces of it. I think I was very overwhelmed, and I was like this. I wasn't expecting any of it. Honestly, I didn't really know what to expect, but I was just I feel like I was kind of scared. I feel like I wasn't prepared adequately for what exactly you're doing.
No.
It just feels, I don't know. I feel like if I were to describe how I felt, I would feel like I even like lost myself even more. It just felt like I was betraying myself, just even being there and going through with everything. I just felt like I was not myself in that moment. I just was like this, I don't know, this vessel. I was a vessel. Like I didn't feel like Lindsay. And, Travis was there, and he hadn't served a mission. So he went through a couple days prior to me, and then I went through. And so we did the endowment ceremony. And then on our wedding day, we got to the temple, and both of our families are not LDS for the most part. And so pretty much everybody had to be in the waiting room. And
That's sad.
we had 6 people in the sealing room with us. I have a couple of cousins that are LDS that converted, and they were able to be in the sealing with us. A couple of friends. My grandma was there. She had rejoined the church and came to the temple and was able to, she had already been endowed and everything. And so she came in to the sealing, but neither sets of our parents were in our sealing at all.
Did they want to be? Were they there? Was this a hard thing for them?
It was extremely hard. And this is a subject that to this day is difficult for me to talk about because I feel a lot of guilt around it. I am my mother's only daughter, and she did not get to be in that room with me. And, you know, my dad and I have a complicated relationship, but I still feel like he deserved to be in there. And it wasn't okay that he got excluded from that. And it wasn't okay that Travis's parents and siblings got excluded from that either, because it was so special. And now that I can look back on it, if I were to do it over, all I want is to be surrounded by them, by those people that we love and that love us and that know us best. And they weren't able to be a part of it. We were able to include them in different ways. So we did a ring ceremony. And for people that might not know what that is, it's essentially when you have like a civil ceremony after you get sealed in the temple, and you don't wear your temple clothes. You just wear like a regular wedding dress, and you do the whole walking down the aisle thing. But we weren't allowed to say our own vows. We were told that that wasn't allowed. And it
can't happen on temple property either. Like there is never like anything remotely close to any kind of a ceremony outside of the sealing is not allowed. Yeah.
Yeah. So we actually had it in my grandparents' backyard, which I love. Oh, it was so cute, and just, it was so simple and perfect. And we were young, and we didn't care how fancy it was. Like, we just were in love, and we just wanted to get married. And so we had the civil ceremony in the backyard, and, you know, that was for everyone else that couldn't come in the sealing with us.
Yeah. I wanted to jump on this just real quick to talk about, like, with the sealings. This is something that the church likes to have a good reputation for, is about families. And I think this is one of the ways that there's many ways that the church hurts families. And I think this is a really big one, especially for converts, because you are less likely to have family members. But even if you grew up in the church and your whole family is, because there are family members who leave or who are, you know, quote unquote unworthy. Yeah. So it could still be like they're believing members, but your brothers and sisters can't come. And also, if they're younger, if you've got a big Mormon family, if you're the older one, you have to be endowed yourself to even attend the ceremony, not just to be involved in the ceremony and getting married. So I know there's plenty of, again, just full, faithful, believing family members that they were 16, and so they weren't endowed. And so these families also miss out on this really important event, and it's very sad. Yeah. Did you want to say, I can read about about, you know, from Eunice, or did you want to say something else before I do that?
Yeah. So the whole getting a new name thing in the temple was so weird to me.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't understand. And then I was like, and then they, you know, they told me, well, it's your name that, you know, God will call you forth by or whatever. And so I was like, husband. Okay. Or your husband. I'm sorry. Yeah. And see, I've been out of it for a while. And so, I'm like, okay, yeah, like that's important. And then they told me I couldn't know Travis's name. And I was like, what crock of BS is that? Like, that is not equal at all. And I don't think that that's fair, for one. Like, it was just another thing that like really irritated me. And so I put it on the shelf, and I got my new name, and it was Eunice, which I freaking hated. It was ugly. And I was just like, really, out of all the names, it's Eunice. And then I found out after I left the church that they just cycle through the names, and that it actually isn't like a name that was chosen for you. It is just a name that's recycled on that same day every year or month or whatever. So Yeah.
Gene, did you have any thoughts on the name? I think there's different ones where I think among men and women where they're just not as popular. And the men, I'm forgetting one of the guys. It's the hunter that ah
Oh, yeah.
it's a hunt. So it's a biblical name, but I think it makes me think of like the Bugs Bunny cartoons that's kind of made up.
Elmer Fudd.
Yeah, well, this is gonna bother me.
Yeah. So
Because it's now kind of seen as like an idiot. You
mine
guys
was
know what I mean?
Jeremiah,
Yeah. Oh, Jeremiah is nice.
which is not
Yeah.
so bad.
No,
And
it's not.
I had to remember it by thinking Jeremiah was a bull.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Okay, I have to look it up because it's gonna bother me. I can't pull it up.
You know what I was wondering just now about, like,
Yeah.
why the women can't know the husband's name, and I was wondering if some of the names were embarrassing to men, and so whoever was in charge is like, yeah, I don't want my wife to know my name. Okay, well, let's
Nimrod.
Oh,
Nimrod,
yeah.
Nimrod.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't be such a Nimrod.
Guys
so maybe
had
whoever
like
had
a 1 in
Nimrod
30 chance, to be a Nimrod.
said,
funny.
hey,
So,
I don't want my wife to know.
yeah, no, that was something else because I knew that I would be getting a name, and I did know that there was an exchanging of names for the wedding, but I somehow missed that it wasn't both. And so my boyfriend, when he had served a mission, so when he went to the temple and he had gotten a new name, he was the one that told me that if we got married, because he was trying to decide, like, is he going to go on a mission or stay and keep going to school and maybe get married with me. And so he was the one that said that I would tell him mine when I went through, but he wasn't going to tell me his. And I thought he was wrong because I was like, he's a convert. He must have misunderstood that. And also, like, he was also foreign. He wasn't American born. So I thought, maybe it's a language.
Yeah.
He's a convert and it's a language thing. He must have gotten that wrong. And he's like, no, I'm pretty sure like that's what they said. And I remember that really hitting me too, because as much as like in the church, when you're constantly faced with all kinds of sexism, you make excuses and you twist things, you do the mental gymnastics, or at least I did, to try to make it to make me feel like I am equal, and it is. And that was just one of the things that I think is the same thing. Like, as soon as I heard it, there was just it just hits hard, and you're like, wait, that hurts, and that seems wrong. So I wanted to, so this is one of the chapters, and the name of the chapter is Eunice. So I'm skipping around a little bit, but this was just really, I loved reading this, and I could relate so much. And I think a lot of women will relate to this. You say, looking back, the true Lindsay was gone long before Eunice was bestowed upon her. She had been intricately groomed for that day after years of checking boxes to fit the mold of what a good Mormon girl should look like. By the time I had become Eunice, I was half the girl I used to be, even though I didn't see it at the time. You go on to say, I had traded the desert for a church pew, my backwards baseball cap for a dress and a pair of pantyhose, my cleverness and wit and sense of adventure for rules, scripture memorization, and Sunday school. Somewhere along the way, I traded my soul for a facade of eternal bliss. And I thought that was really, really powerful.
Yeah.
And very much matching, I think, my journey as well, which I think is why, like, this is so well done, and people will relate to that.
Thank you.
Because there is really a very narrow view of what a good Mormon woman is, and it's conformity. It's the less you can stand out, kind of the better in a lot of ways. So yeah.
Yeah, and just kind of like you had said earlier, is like I already kind of had this foundation because I was a convert. So I kind of had this foundation of who I was and who I was on the path to become. And then I had this like intermission where I was in the church and they were telling me something a little different.
Better. You're something better. Yeah.
Right. And so I felt like, in some ways, in order to fit into that mold and to be a part of that community, that I had to betray who I was and who I thought, I was going to become, like the foundation, the little Lindsay, if you will. I had to betray her in order to become a grown-up LDS woman. And really all I wanted was to be her again. I just wanted to be that little Lindsay again, because that's still who was in there somewhere. She
Because
had just
little
been,
Lindsay had a thought that she could be president one day.
yeah, yeah. You know, when I was at
Maybe, yeah.
BYU,
The whole world's open. Yeah.
when I was at BYU, Idaho, I had a major to go into public health, and I wanted to work globally, and I wanted to, I wanted to change the world. I wanted to make the world a better place. And I was told, no, you should change your major because that's not a good major for if you want to be a wife and a mom. So I did. And
we talked about this before, and I did want to bring up this point again because there are a few careers that are okay for women to have, and a lot of times like a health career is one of them. Like nursing is a very, very common one. And to me, I thought it was interesting that because public health is in that field, but I also, again, this is just me and just the sense that because it's a public kind of facing job and it's not directly in a caregiver role, but it's got you in some kind of administration, that was maybe
Decision
why
making.
yeah,
making decisions and policies, and that's not really where women belong in the church. So
right.
That was my thought on that.
Right.
Yeah.
And being a leader, I want to be in leadership positions. Now that I'm an educator, I love being able to lead a classroom every day. I love teaching people. And so the fact that, and that's always just been in me, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I want people that truly care for me to encourage that, not stifle it and tell me what I can and can't do with those gifts that I have or the motivations that I have. And so again,
it's seen as a bad trait in a woman where there's this double standard. Because I know like people would watch that and say, like hearing you say like, I want to be in a leadership position, that's very taboo to say. And the men in the church who have the ability to be a leader will say all the time, like, I don't want to be a leader. There's this like humility about it. And if you wanting to or say, and a ton of them do. I mean, and Gene, like we all know these men that are falsely humble or whatever, but they want to be, and they're gunning for it. They're brown nosing the bishop or the mission president or the state president or whatever. But yeah, there's a big taboo around saying something like that. But still, the idea is, and the way I saw it was, again, leadership, especially in God's church, was just so important for like furthering his work. So if you loved God and if you loved the church and you wanted to, you would naturally want to be in a position to influence like as many people as possible. And so, and the men do see it that way. And when they talk about the priesthood and the mantle of the priesthood, those are the terms they use, to talk about it and talk about their callings and stuff. But yeah, if a woman has a similar feeling or just that much desire to follow God and really be part of the work, that's seen as like wanting it for, vanity of the world and for the title and stuff like that. And I just think that that's really, really sad because it is a talent, I think, to be able to do that. Not everybody can, and not everybody wants to, which is fine. But people like good teachers and good influencers are just so important. And it's sad that I think, just because of the gender that we are, that gets pushed down or taken off the table when there's a lot of people that we could touch that the men couldn't. So yeah,
for sure.
Sorry, I keep kind of dragging things down a little bit because I just really, I related so much. So I'll try to pull back a little bit. So
You're fine.
Because it was your marriage and like with your husband, okay, you're trying to do the right thing. And as a Mormon woman, like our salvation, once you get married, is really dependent on our husband. And so your husband is the first one to kind of start to, I guess, fall away from the path. And that causes issues with you, naturally, as it does for most Mormon women. It's a terrible, scary thing for a husband to lose faith. And Gene, you're the other side of this story because that's also what happened with you and Michelle, and maybe at some point you can speak to that if you feel comfortable. But let's go, because that's where I took things off the rails, I think.
Okay.
So your husband, he pulls back. How did that go? What happened?
Okay, so one Sunday I was getting ready for church. I got out of the shower and I was getting dressed, and we had our son was about a year old at that time, so we had to get him ready. And I come downstairs, my husband had the TV on, he was watching football, and I said, "Hey, are you gonna get ready to go? You're still like in your sweatpants, and he's like, I can't do it anymore. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, I can't do this anymore. And at first, for like just one split second, I thought he was talking about like our marriage, but he was like, I mean, this, like on Sundays, I can't do this anymore. I can't go to church and pretend like I want to be there. I can't go to church and pretend like I have a testimony, because I don't want anything to do with it, to be honest with you. Like I'm done. And I, like, my whole world just got completely thrown off its axis at that point. Going back to my patriarchal blessing, I was told that if I stayed righteous, that if I stayed on the right path, that I would find an eternal companion who would take me there, who would take me all the way, and we would live together forever with our family. And I thought that's what we were doing. I thought that was the plan.
That's right. And G has to be on the other side and call out for Eunice in order for you to make it to the
Exactly.
kingdom.
Exactly. And so as a woman, I can't get there by myself. And I can't get there if I'm sealed to someone who can't go there either. So I went upstairs. I remember going upstairs. I remember my hair was still wet. I remember being in a skirt and sitting on the floor and curling up in a ball and hysterically bawling, like uncontrollably bawling. I had no idea what to do. And I felt like that shelf that I had been placing all of those little things on for years and years and years, it just came crashing down in that moment, because, you know, my husband, Travis, and our son are the two most important people in my life. I trust my husband more than anyone. And now our eternal salvation is on the line. And
the whole goal, the whole purpose that like has been lost.
Right.
Basically.
Right. And it took me a while to kind of like collect myself. But when I did, I asked some more questions, and he just said, I'm not going to be a hypocrite. I'm not going to go to church every Sunday and pretend. That's not what I'm going to do. That's not who I am. But if you want to go to church and if you want to take our son, then you can do that. And I will support you in that. He didn't want to go with us, but he said, you know, he would support us if we wanted to go. He wouldn't give us a hard time or challenge it or anything like that. He wanted to support whatever I thought was right for me. And I mean, honestly, that was like the first time as a woman in the church where like someone gave me my agency back. Like that was like the first time where someone was like, you can do what's best for you. It's okay if it's not good for me, but you can do what's best for you. And I was like, well, wait, what? I don't know what to do with that, because as a woman in the church, I've been told that I have to serve and serve and serve, you know, until there's nothing left. And that's my whole purpose here, is to serve and to like create and like create life and to serve that life.
Choosing yourself is selfish and vain. Right. Yeah. And will not make you happy ultimately, if you're, because selfish people are too focused on, there's no healthy self-love in that at all. No. So that's a gift from your husband, I think, in two ways, not just in giving you that permission, but also in living that way himself, because I think when other people are you know, refuse to pretend and they are themselves, I think that also maybe less explicitly, but still kind of gives us permission as well. I think that's something I know I didn't really have a sense for authenticity, and the word wasn't used as much. I feel like, you know, in middle school or high school or even on my mission, whereas today it's a very common thing. I think people are saying it's in the vernacular, I guess, but it wasn't so much then. But I remember meeting people on my mission that I could tell they were their authentic selves. That's what it was I was feeling. I just didn't know what to call it at the time. There just seemed really something special about them and amazing, and they were happy the way they were. And that was really confusing as a missionary, because it was like, I'm here because I have the gospel, like the true gospel, and that's supposed to make people happy, you know, the happiest on the whole earth. And so at first I used to kind of reconcile it by being like, boy, if they're this great and this happy now, then they'll be even more happy if they could accept the gospel. But over time I started to realize for many people, they are the happiest they could be. And if I was honest with myself, clearly much happier and comfortable with themselves than I was with myself, even though I apparently have this amazing great advantage that I was born with, being in, you know, God's little select army here, a very small part of the population. But I started to realize for some people that they would lose too much of themselves if they joined the church, that they would not be happy. And of course, most of them weren't even interested. And I think you get to a point when you do know yourself authentically, these kinds of things just aren't attractive enough to you. It's very difficult for something unhealthy like the church to kind of come in and take over when you've got that much strength there. But anyway, yeah. So your husband is saying, I can't do this, and I'm not going to. I'm going to do what's right for me, and I'm going to let you do what's right for you. That's
Yes.
really awesome.
Yes. And it took me a while. So honestly, like the next year was like a blur for me, because it was a full year of just deconstruction, figuring out exactly what I believed, what I didn't believe. But I
And you were going to
realized
church?
I was trying to go to different churches. I was studying, I guess. I was like trying to go out and just like see what other churches were like. I was trying to pay attention to my body for the first time, what it was telling me. I was trying to pay attention to how I was feeling without shame. And so I went to like non-denominational churches. I started going to therapy, and I started just really allowing myself to think for myself instead of throwing myself further into the LDS bubble of this is how you should think and act and feel at all times. I just allowed myself space, and I am so proud of myself for being able to do that, because that was so pivotal for the next part of my life. I will say I've been out for 10 years now, so sometimes this gets a little foggy for me because I truly have moved on with my life. I will say I really don't think about the church much at all, especially after I wrote VIXEN. I had been out for 5 years by the time I wrote VIXEN. And once I published it, it was like the door had closed on that chapter of my life. I was able to process it through my craft of writing, and I was able to heal a lot of wounds that had been kind of stuck inside of me. But it took me, I would say, at least a year or 2 years to fully deconstruct and figure out exactly who I was, exactly what I believed. And I remember one day I had the thought, I think I was writing in my journal or something, and I thought to myself, I don't have to have all the answers. And I wrote it down. I said, I don't have to have all the answers. And it was, again, one of those moments where like the boulders just kind of came off my shoulders, like just a sigh of relief. Like, I don't have to have all the answers all the time. And if I'm really being honest, I mean, humans are never going to have all the answers to the universe, right? Like, we're never going to have all the answers to everything. Even if a church is claiming they have, you know, the fullness of the truth of the gospel and all this stuff, that's not actually true, because, you know, we don't know everything and we're never going to. And so it gave me that freedom of thought to be able to kind of figure out what I believe for myself. And it separated some things for me, so I wasn't so enmeshed all the time, which allowed me to heal a little bit faster and a little bit more. So.
Right. And about when did you start thinking that you should write a book?
Okay, well, I have been a writer my entire life. I've always loved writing stories and things. And I realized, I think, in my young adulthood that I process emotions much more effectively if I write it down. And so I started writing more when I realized that. And then when I left the church, I started writing a ton, but I wasn't sharing anything. I was just keeping it to myself. And then I decided I was going to start taking this a little bit more seriously. And so I decided I was going to sign up for a writer's conference. So I signed up for a writer's conference. It was a week long. I got a scholarship to go. I was so excited. And I got to meet like really impactful writers, people that were very well known in the industry. And all of them were like, why aren't you telling your story? Like, I was presenting writing in some of my seminars and stuff that were fun and, you know, they were creative and stuff. But then when they got to know me a little bit more, they were like, no, Lindsay, like this is what you should be writing about. People need to hear this.
Because you had a transformation.
Yeah. And they were like, it's not a get rich quick story. It's not let me be the internet's latest influencer. It has nothing to do with that. It was like, I have an experience that other people are having, but they're not allowed to talk about it because they're scared, and they're scared they're going to lose love. They're scared of the shame that they feel for sharing it so publicly. And you can kind of bring a light to it. And it's something that's very brave and scary to do, but you can be a resource for people who are going through something similar, even if it's totally different, like they can still relate in some way. And so I was like, okay, maybe I will be brave enough to do that someday, but I had no plans of doing it right then. And then COVID happened and I had nothing else to do. And so I got laid off, and I decided that I was going to write. And so my goal was 10,000 words a month, which is not that much because you have a whole month of literally doing nothing. And so I was just writing. And then I put it out there. I made a post on Facebook. I didn't say what I was writing about, but I just said, I'm working on a new piece, and I would just love any support I can get and any guidance. Any love, just throw it my way. And I ended up, like, through a friend of a friend, I got hooked up with my publisher, and I ended up joining like a group of writers. We'd meet every week and share our work and give tips and tricks. And I got everything lined up, and then VIXEN was born. So it all just kind of happened really serendipitously, I guess you could say. Even though I know COVID was very hard for a lot of people, it was kind of a beautiful time in a certain way for me, because I was able to finally sit down and write my story. So
10,000 words a month, and you didn't even have a rock and a hat.
no, I didn't.
Let's talk about, because this is something that we had talked about before, and I guess maybe it's just a little behind the scenes. Spoiler alert is that this is actually the second time that we're doing this episode. But the great thing about it is that I got the book since then. So I think this is actually going way better and way awesome.
I
But you
think so
just
too.
alluded to something about a cost. And this kind of came out, I think, in our kind of like advice to give kind of a thing, because unfortunately there is a cost to authenticity. I think there's a lot more benefit to it, but yeah, do you want to speak to that? And for somebody, I think this is where the really hard thing comes in, is because when you spend all this time living a kind of a fake life, there's a lot of scaffolding around it. There's a lot built in there, and sometimes it has to do with people. You and your husband are still soulmates. It seems like you're doing very well. And Gene is still married to his wife, but a lot of times these inauthentic people end up in inauthentic marriages, and those things kind of get lost along the way anyway. So you do things have to be torn down to be built back up the right way. So did you want to talk about that, because I think that was a part of it for you as well, right?
Yeah, I had spent a lot of my life looking for a community to belong to. I spent a lot of my life searching for a place to land where people would love and accept me unconditionally. And when I started deconstructing, I realized that this community that I belonged to, while they loved me, a lot of them were not capable of loving me unconditionally, because they were not taught how to do that in the first place. The church does not teach people how to love each other unconditionally. Unfortunately, it comes with lots of rules and stipulations. And so I was faced with a choice. I could stay in an organization that has a lot of work to do as far as that goes, as far as loving and accepting people for who they are, no matter what. And I could continue to try to fit this mold that I really wasn't excited to be a part of. I was very frustrated often about the roles I was undertaking. Or I could follow the person who did actually love me unconditionally, the people that loved me unconditionally. meaning my husband Travis and my son. They loved me unconditionally no matter what. And so I chose them. I chose my family over the church. And I would make that choice every single time if I had to do it over again. But I will be lying if I said that in writing VIXEN, there was still love left to lose, because even though I'd left the church, I hadn't been public about it. So I was still able to save face with a lot of people that I grew up with and people that were in my ward and things like that. But once I wrote VIXEN, I couldn't save face anymore. I was literally bearing my soul to the world. And I had to come face to face with the fact that I was going to lose love, and that this community that I'd worked really hard to build for myself was going to go away. And I think a lot of people that are leaving the church are faced with the same exact thing. They're terrified of losing love. They're terrified of losing their community. And unfortunately, that happens. And I hope that it doesn't happen as much anymore. I don't like that it happens, but it happens. And so, for anybody that's, watching us right now, or that's reading VIXEN, or that's going through something similar, your fears are valid, that you may lose love, you may lose community, but being authentic to yourself and loving yourself where you're at is so important and so brave, and it matters, and your story matters. So,
and you deserve to be happy.
And you deserve to be happy. Absolutely. Yes. So thanks for letting me share that.
I was just thinking of, the musical Wicked. There's a song that Elphaba, who's the Wicked Witch, she starts off as a very good person. And I mean, she is a good person, but there's a line from her. I think it might be like the intermission song, which is where things really start to change for her, and she's accepting herself and really kind of grinding down into that. But I'm so bad with lyrics off the cuff, but there's a part to that song that always really stood out to me, and especially in deconstruction. But she's talking about, she says, I'm doing it where I'm messing up. She says she was trying to avoid losing love. I guess I've lost. And if that's love, then it comes at much too high a cost. And that just always like hits to me. And she sings it. She just like belts it out so well. Because and just the wording, it seems weird, like losing love. I guess I've lost. It's like, well, are you losing it or have you lost it? And it's kind of both. And that's something that I realized when I became Maven. That was, a nickname, a pseudonym, so I could still hide from my family the fact that I had lost faith, because I wasn't ready to have that conversation. And I knew that my relationship with them would never be the same again. And so I knew like the relationship, because of that, I knew the relationship I had with them wasn't really real in a way that it was fake, but I could still maybe have some hope that it would carry over once that happened. But it's once the cat's out of the bag, you can't ever undo it. And so initially it was just going to be about a year, and then things happened with family, so it ended up getting put off. So I think it was actually about 2 or 3 years maybe totally. And for some of them, I'm living in the house with them pretending to be or trying to pretend to be a believer still, and just kind of hiding this true self that I am. And so but I think, there just comes to a point where you can't hide anymore. It's too painful not to be, like your husband got to, like, I can't pretend anymore. And we have to face the loss of that relationship. But again, it's the relationship, if it gets lost, it wasn't really there, so it's not that we're losing something that we had, we're losing something that we lost already, or maybe never really did have. And like Alphaba says, like if that's what love is, if love for other people means that you have to give up so much of yourself, that's a really high cost. And I think too high, honestly. And I also like, the more of us that do it, the easier it is for others to do it. I took a long time to deconstruct. I was very, very in. And it took a lot of people that I respected and that I believed were as in as I was to, I was very disappointed when they left, obviously, because I still very much, but I just know that if it weren't for the internet, if it weren't for people that have done so much work in this area, I would still be, I think, living out quite a miserable Mormon woman life that
Yeah.
most of my ancestors did too. All the women kind of going back in my family lived these really, lives in quiet desperation, I guess, to use another literary phrase. But anyway, yeah. So that's my 2 cents on top of that. And
So I appreciate that, because there's a chapter in VIXEN that's called Garden Beds. And it talks about exactly that. It talks about losing relationships and how sometimes you're planted in a garden bed that is not right for you. And that I think I compare myself in the book to like a pepper or something. And I'm like, I'm just this feisty, fiery pepper that, needs ample space to grow. And I can't grow next to certain other vegetables because I take away nutrients from the soil that they need. And they put nutrients in the soil that make me wither away. And you compare that to relationships that you have in your life. And it doesn't matter if they're in the church or not. There are seasons for everything, including relationships. And so I think that there are times in your life where you need certain nutrients to, quote unquote, nutrients from other people. And then there are times where you outgrow that and you don't need that anymore. And you're allowed to go plant yourself somewhere else. And that realizing that was so freeing to me, and it was such a beautiful idea to me, because I never had thought about myself that way, as far as like evolving into something new and something that I was proud of. So
it's an amazing feeling to like who you are, and feel proud of yourself, and that's not something I was able to do really until leaving the church. So yeah, and relationships can come back too. I think the one there are certain family members that I think will come around. So I hope someday that can be reconciled. And if not, I think of the next generation. Honestly, my nieces and nephew. I think I really hope that I'm helping to make the world a better place for them, and that that me being who I am, I will always be this resource that will be in their periphery maybe, and when they're ready to find me or need me, they'll find me, and I look forward to that day. So yeah. So get VIXEN. We're gonna have this here. Let me pull this all up here. Of course, we'll have the links in the show notes below.
Awesome.
It's beautifully done. I think, like I said, if converts and women raised in the church, I think really it's great. It's very empowering to hear, and especially when people can express it well, the things that we go through. It helps us to process our own pain and our own journey. So anyway, that'll be below. Gene, anything else to end with?
So yeah, we could talk about the title, right?
VIXEN.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we could.
Come up with the title.
Or maybe make it like a little teaser.
Yeah.
Oh, and it's one of the chapters that talks about the title, right?
Yeah, right in the introduction.
Yeah, the introduction introduces why VIXEN is named VIXEN. A lot of people have questions about that title, and I knew I always, for some reason, I just had a feeling that whenever I published VIXEN before it had a name, it was going to be one word, and I didn't know why, but I knew it was going to be one word.
And planted had already been taken by Patrick Mason.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted it to be very artistic and creative and metaphorical and all of those things. So, and I think it accomplished that. But so the introduction of VIXEN talks about how, as a little girl, I found a videotape and I popped it in the VCR and I started watching it. And this grainy footage pops up and I see these women on stage, and they're all, it's all decked out in 80s attire, giant hair. They've got lots of fun things going on with the hair and makeup and the jewelry and everything. And they're just rocking out on stage. And I'm like, wow, who are these women? These women are gorgeous. They kind of look like badasses up there. Like they empowered me. I just wanted to be like them. And my mom walked in while I was watching this video and she says, "Oh my God, where did you find that?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know. I just found it underneath the TV and I didn't know what it was. So I popped it in." And she was like, Lindsay, that's me. That's me up there on that stage. And so then she told me the story about how she and her girlfriends entered this competition to, it was a lip syncing competition, and the winner got to meet Bon Jovi. So her and her friends, they had to do 2 songs, and they were named VIXEN. That's what they named their band, was VIXEN. And they ended up winning, and they ended up meeting Bon Jovi. So I was reflecting on that experience when I started writing VIXEN before it had a name. And I thought to myself, you know, that's the first time where I thought to myself, you know, they're lip syncing and they're not really up there singing. My mom even told me, she's like, there was one point I didn't even know the words to the song. I was just totally just freelancing and just moving my mouth. And I'm like,
head banging.
Head banging, yeah. And I'm just like writing VIXEN, and I'm thinking, I have no idea what the heck I'm doing. I feel like I am on stage right now and I don't know the words to this song. I feel like I am just kind of flying by my pants. I'm winging it. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe that's it. You know, I don't know the words to this song, but I'm doing it anyway. And I'm getting up on stage, and I'm going to be brave, and I'm just going to figure it out once I'm up there. And so I was like, I think my book is named VIXEN. I think that that's what it's supposed to be. And so it was a working title, and then I fell in love with it, and here we are. So
I think too, there's a connotation. I mean, a vixen is quite literally a female fox, and so I mean, there's connotations of being like a sexy woman, but also I think there's also foxes in general, including vixens. There's are also known for having attributes like cleverness and maybe some tricksterism, a little bit of mischief, but you know, hopefully kind of good mischief. Sometimes kind of, getting ourselves into trouble kind of thing. And I'm saying ourselves because I relate to this kind of idea. There's just a little bit of like a misbehaving, but still like clever female character. And so I just really liked that as well. And anyway, there we go.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane, for reminding us of that.
Yeah. So thanks, Lindsay, for coming on our show. We want everybody to buy VIXEN. We will provide a link to the book in our description. Everyone out there, like and subscribe. Wish everybody a great rest of the year.
I wanted to add really quick, sorry, that VIXEN is also on audiobook as well. So it's on audiobook. You can get it on Audible, on Amazon. And it's available via ebook too. So
Sweet. There you go. Lots of ways to get it.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.